In the quiet town of Coldhaven, nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, the townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about the old Crowley Manor. Abandoned for nearly a century, the manor stood at the edge of the town, shrouded in fog that never seemed to lift. The air around it was always thick with a damp chill, even on the warmest of days. Children dared each other to approach its gates, but none ever made it close enough to touch the rusted iron bars. The story of Crowley Manor was one of tragedy and despair. It was said that the last occupants, the Crowley family, had all perished under mysterious circumstances. The official records mentioned a fire, but the townspeople whispered of something far darker. The bodies of the Crowleys were never found, and some believed they never truly left the manor. One evening, a group of friends, Jack, Emily, and Sarah, decided to investigate the manor. They had grown up hearing the tales and, driven by curiosity and a sense of adventure, they resolved to uncover the truth behind the rumors. Armed with flashlights and a camera, they made their way to the gates of Crowley Manor just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The gate creaked open with an eerie groan, and the three friends stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the front door. The fog thickened around them, and the air grew colder with each step. Jack, ever the skeptic, joked about the ghosts and how they were probably just stories to scare children. But Sarah, who had always been sensitive to the supernatural, felt a deep sense of unease. As they approached the manor, the front door swung open with a loud bang. The friends exchanged nervous glances but pressed on, stepping into the grand foyer. The inside was in shambles. Dust-covered furniture, peeling wallpaper, and shattered glass littered the floor. Yet, despite the decay, there was a strange sense of order, as if the house had been left in a hurry but never truly abandoned. Suddenly, Emily felt a cold hand brush against her arm. She gasped and spun around, but there was nothing there. "Did you feel that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Jack laughed it off, but Sarah's eyes darted around the room, her heart racing. She could feel something watching them. They moved deeper into the house, exploring room after room. In the dining room, they found an old photograph of the Crowley family, its glass frame cracked. The faces in the photo were stern, almost disapproving, and as they stared at it, the temperature in the room dropped noticeably. A faint whisper echoed through the air, too soft to make out the words. In the corner of the room, a shadow shifted. Emily caught it in the corner of her eye and turned quickly, but again, nothing was there. "We should go," she urged, but Jack insisted they explore further. They climbed the grand staircase to the second floor, where the bedrooms were located. As they reached the top of the stairs, they heard a soft humming, like a lullaby, coming from one of the rooms. Sarah hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to leave, but Jack, driven by a mix of bravado and curiosity, led the way. They followed the sound to a large bedroom at the end of the hall. Inside, the room was almost untouched by time. The bed was neatly made, and the curtains, though faded, were drawn tightly shut. In the middle of the room stood a woman, her back to them, humming softly as she combed her long, dark hair. She was dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown, and her presence felt out of place, as if she belonged to another era. "Excuse me," Jack called out, his voice shaky. The woman stopped humming but did not turn around. The air grew heavy, oppressive, as the tension in the room mounted. Emily took a step back, her breath shallow, and Sarah clutched her arm. Suddenly, the woman turned, revealing a face that was not human but a ghastly, distorted visage of anger and pain. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth twisted into a scream that was silent but filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. The friends froze in terror as the ghostly figure began to advance toward them, her movements jerky and unnatural. Sarah screamed, breaking the spell, and they all bolted from the room, racing down the stairs. The manor seemed to come alive around them. Doors slammed, windows rattled, and the floorboards creaked under the weight of unseen footsteps. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the very walls were trying to trap them inside. They burst through the front door and ran down the path, not stopping until they were well beyond the gates. The fog lifted as they reached the safety of the town, but the memory of what they had seen lingered in their minds. Back in Coldhaven, They told no one of their experience. Jack, once so confident, was now a shadow of himself, his bravado shattered. Emily couldn't shake the feeling of cold hands on her skin, and Sarah, who had always been in tune with the supernatural, knew that something had followed them back. That night, as they tried to sleep, each of them heard the soft humming of a lullaby in their ears, a haunting reminder that the ghosts of Crowley Manor were far from finished with them. In the days following their terrifying encounter at Crowley Manor, Jack, Emily, and Sarah struggled to return to their normal lives. The experience had left a deep mark on them, and each day seemed to drag them further into the darkness that had followed them home. Jack, once the life of every gathering, became withdrawn. He avoided his friends and barely left his house. His nights were plagued with vivid nightmares of the woman in the manor. He would wake up drenched in sweat, the phantom of her hollow eyes burning in his memory. His health began to deteriorate rapidly, as though something was draining the life out of him. Emily wasn't faring any better. She couldn't escape the sensation of cold hands brushing against her skin, even in broad daylight. The feeling was so persistent that she began to wear multiple layers of clothing, hoping to ward off the invisible touch. At night, she heard soft whispers echoing in her room, repeating her name over and over again. She barely slept and started to see things out of the corner of her eye, shadows that flitted just beyond her vision, always disappearing when she turned to look. Sarah, the most attuned to the supernatural, felt the burden of their encounter most acutely. She knew that what they had unleashed at Crowley Manor was not just a ghostly apparition, but something far more malevolent. The spirits in the manor had latched onto them, and the presence she felt at night wasn't just watching, it was waiting. For what? She didn't know, but the sense of impending doom was overwhelming. She spent hours researching the history of the manor, hoping to find a way to rid themselves of the entity. But the more she uncovered, the more hopeless their situation seemed. The Crowleys had dabbled in dark rituals, seeking to commune with the dead in an effort to unlock the secrets of eternal life. The fire that had supposedly consumed them was a cover story. In reality, they had been conducting a final, forbidden ritual that went horribly wrong. The spirits they had summoned did not leave when the ritual failed. Instead, they remained bound to the manor, trapped between worlds and filled with a vengeful rage. One evening, as the three friends gathered in Sarah's home, they finally confronted the truth. "We can't keep pretending this will go away," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "We've brought something back with us, and it's not going to stop until it gets what it wants." Jack, his face gaunt and hollow, nodded silently. Emily, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, clenched her fists. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated. "There's a way, a ritual, but it's dangerous, and we'd have to go back to the manor." Jack recoiled at the thought. "Go back? Are you insane? That place nearly killed us." "We don't have a choice," Sarah insisted. "If we don't send it back, it will consume us one by one." Reluctantly, they agreed to return to Crowley Manor. The next night, armed with candles, salt, and the instructions for the ritual, they made their way back to the accursed house. The fog was thicker this time, almost suffocating as they approached the gates. The air crackled with a strange energy, and the sense of being watched was even stronger than before. Inside the manor, the atmosphere was stifling, the walls seeming to close in on them. They made their way to the grand foyer, where Sarah began to draw a circle of salt on the floor, muttering incantations under her breath. Jack and Emily placed the candles at the points of the circle, their hands trembling as the darkness around them seemed to press closer. As Sarah chanted the final words, the temperature in the room plummeted, and the candles flickered violently. The oppressive silence was shattered by a deafening scream that seemed to come from all directions at once. The floor beneath them trembled, and the walls began to bleed a thick, dark substance that reeked of decay. The ghostly figure of the woman materialized in the center of the circle, her twisted face contorted in fury. "You dare return," she hissed, her voice a cacophony of otherworldly echoes. "You cannot banish me." Sarah, her voice steady despite her fear, continued the ritual, We send you back to the darkness from whence you came. You have no power here." The woman's form began to flicker, her screams growing louder as she struggled against the force of the ritual. The entire manor seemed to shake with her fury, the walls cracking and the ceiling threatening to collapse. But just as it seemed the ritual would succeed, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles. The salt circle broke as the floor split open, and the woman's ghastly form solidified once more. With a triumphant laugh, she reached out toward them, her fingers elongating into sharp, shadowy claws. "You cannot rid yourselves of me," she whispered, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You belong to me now." The ground beneath them gave way, and the friends were plunged into darkness. They awoke hours later, outside the manor, with no memory of how they had escaped. The fog had lifted, but the house stood ominously silent behind them, as if waiting for their return. As they staggered back to the town, the realization dawned on them. The ritual had failed. The entity was still with them, stronger than ever, and it had no intention of letting them go. The boundaries between their world and the darkness of Crowley Manor were thinning, and they could feel the presence growing, reaching into their very souls. Each night, the humming grew louder, the whispers more insistent, and the shadows more tangible. The friends knew they were running out of time, but what could they do? How could they fight something that was already inside them, twisting their minds and bodies to its will? As they sat together in Sarah's living room, the cold creeping in through the walls, they realized that their story was far from over. Crowley Manor had claimed them, and now they were part of its curse. They would have to face the darkness again, but this time, the price for failure would be their very souls. And somewhere in the depths of the manor, the woman waited, her hollow eyes filled with malice, her twisted smile promising the agony that was yet to come. In the days that followed their failed ritual, the three friends felt the presence of Crowley Manor tighten its grip on their lives. The whispers that once haunted their nights began to invade their days, a constant murmur just beyond the edge of their hearing. The humming that had once been distant now seemed to come from within their own heads, a maddening tune that they could never escape. Sarah, desperate for answers, delved deeper into the dark history of the Crowley family. She uncovered something she had missed before, a journal hidden away in the town's archives. The journal belonged to the eldest Crowley son, Jonathan, who had been deeply involved in the rituals that doomed his family. The last entry was a chilling confession. "We have opened a door that cannot be closed. The woman we summoned is no mere spirit, she is a gatekeeper, a herald of something far worse. She has bound herself to this place, and now to us. We thought we could control her, but we were fools. She is not alone. There are others, waiting on the other side, and she is calling them forth. If anyone reads this, know that you cannot escape her. She will consume you, body and soul, and when she is done, she will bring the others through. We have damned ourselves, and now, so have you." Sarah's hands trembled as she finished reading. She knew now that the woman wasn't just a ghost, she was a conduit for something far more terrifying. And the ritual they had attempted hadn't just failed, it had strengthened the connection between the woman and their world. The darkness was spreading, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. As she returned home that night, she felt a heavy weight settle on her chest. The streets were eerily quiet, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. She reached her house and found the front door ajar, the inside dark and cold. Jack and Emily were waiting for her inside, their faces pale and gaunt. "We need to leave, Sarah," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have to get out of Coldhaven." But Sarah shook her head. "It's too late. She's already inside us. There's nowhere we can go." Just then, the lights flickered, and the temperature in the room plummeted. The humming grew louder, echoing in their heads, and the shadows in the corners of the room began to twist and writhe, taking on shapes that defied logic. Suddenly, the woman appeared in the center of the room, her ghastly face contorted in a twisted grin. "You cannot run," she hissed, her voice like nails on glass. "You belong to me now." The friends tried to move, to flee, but their bodies were paralyzed with fear. The shadows around them began to close in, wrapping around their limbs like cold, dead hands. The woman reached out, her fingers elongating into sharp claws that dug into their flesh. And as she did, they felt their life force being drained, pulled into the abyss from which she had come. Jack's scream was the first to break the silence, but it was cut short as the shadows enveloped him, pulling him into the darkness. Emily followed, her body convulsing as the shadows consumed her, her eyes wide with terror. Sarah watched in horror, unable to move, as her friends were swallowed by the darkness, their forms disappearing into the void. The woman turned to Sarah, her hollow eyes burning with malevolent glee. "Now it's your turn," she whispered, her voice filled with the promise of unimaginable pain. But just as the shadows began to close in around her, Sarah's vision blurred, and she found herself standing outside the manor, the fog swirling around her. She was alone, the air thick with silence. The manor loomed before her, its windows dark and empty, but she could feel the presence inside, waiting for her to return. She knew, with a sinking dread, that she had been spared for now. The woman had taken Jack and Emily, but Sarah was left to suffer, to carry the burden of the knowledge she had uncovered. The darkness inside her was growing, feeding off her fear and despair, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it consumed her as well. As she turned to leave, she heard the faint sound of humming, drifting on the wind. It was coming from the manor, a haunting melody that echoed in her mind. And then, just as she reached the gates, she saw them, Jack and Emily, standing in the doorway, their eyes vacant, their bodies twisted by the darkness that had claimed them. They reached out to her, their voices whispering her name, begging her to join them. Sarah ran, but no matter how far she went, she couldn't escape the sound of their voices, the sight of their empty eyes. The humming followed her wherever she went, a constant reminder that the darkness of Crowley Manor was never far behind. And in the dead of night, as she lay in her bed, she knew that the woman was still watching, still waiting for the day when Sarah would return to the manor to join her friends in the eternal darkness. Because in Coldhaven, once you crossed the threshold of Crowley Manor, there was no escape. The darkness was patient, and it would have them all in the end.